The question is that this House has considered the future of horse racing. Philip Davies.
Thank you very much, Mr Hosey. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for West Suffolk for bringing forward this important debate. I should at the start, Mr Hosey, make clear my declaration of interest. I am a board member of the Racehorse Owners Association. I have been to the races at the kind invitation of a number of people that are in the register, and I am also the modest owner of horses, or should I, racehorses, should I actually say, it's probably better to say I'm an owner of modest racehorses, to be perfectly honest. I will give them.
Matt Hancock.
I completely forgot to also draw the Chamber's attention to my register, because I have been kindly supported by many people across horse racing over many years who support me because I make these arguments. I don't make these arguments because they support me.
Well, I'm sure we're all grateful to the right honourable gentleman for that. Unlike him and unlike the member for Hexham, I don't seek to ride any winners at horse racing. I just try and back a few, Mr Hosey, with mixed results. It has to be said. But at least when I lose, I know I'm contributing to the levy, as the right honourable gentleman was encouraging us all to do. As he said, horse racing is a very successful sport in this country, but it is under threat. It's under increasing threat from foreign competition, particularly in the Middle East, where often many of our best horses are now sold to race because it's much more profitable for them to race there than it is to race in the United Kingdom. And the fact of the matter is, whether people like it or not, the vast majority of income from the racing industry comes through betting, one way or another. Owners, I should say, put an awful lot of money into it without much expectation of any return, and I can certainly vouch for that myself, Mr Hosey. But betting brings in around £350 million a year into the industry, much more than total prize money that there is in the UK. And if racing loses that betting income, I'm afraid the problems it's suffering from horses moving overseas will only get worse, and British racing, which is the best in the world, would cease to be so. And that would be terrible for the country as a whole, as well as people's individual constituencies. And the right honourable gentleman was absolutely right to focus much of his remarks on the issue of affordability checks, which is what I want to concentrate on in the short time I will have available, Mr Hosey. There's an interesting issue of principle here in terms of who decides what people can afford to bet on anything, in terms of who decides what people can afford to spend on anything, to be perfectly honest. And we are in a rather interesting situation whereby the government are deciding that people should have an affordability check on their betting, but on nothing else. So people can spend a modest amount on betting. If you have £2,000, lose that over 90 days, you will have enhanced affordability checks. Well, let me give you an illustration of how absurd this situation is, Mr Hosey. You might get a racehorse owner who might buy 10 horses. They may spend £1 million buying those horses each year at the sales, none of which is subject to an affordability check. They then put those 10 horses in training, and they'll have training fees of about £250,000 a year, none of which is subject to an affordability check. And yet, if they happen to spend £2,000 betting on those horses over a 90-day period, they will, at the government's behest, be subject to an enhanced affordability check. It's a complete nonsense, Mr Hosey. Surely nobody here thinks that those people should be subject to an affordability check on that basis. And what the racing industry worries about is that those people who spend an awful lot of money owning horses, buying horses, who enjoy having a bet on their horses when they run, will leave the sport because that last part will be at risk if the government's plans go ahead. That would be tragic for the racing industry. It would be tragic for those people, and it can't be the government's intention when it introduced these affordability checks. This sort of blanket number is, in my view, wrong. And why just betting? I mean, why is it that just betting is frowned upon to such an extent that the government wants to stick its nose in and find out whether or not I can afford to spend my money, it's my money after all, on betting? It doesn't check whether I can afford to buy a pair of shoes or a coat or a suit or any of these other things. It only wants to interfere if I'm betting on anything, and in particular horses. And I think there's an important matter of principle here. I also think that some of the way that the rules are intended are ridiculous. So, for example, it's £2,000 over 90 days that you lose and you get an enhanced affordability check, but you can only offset 7 days of winnings within 7 days against that. So they're mounting up the losses over 90 days, but you can only offset any winnings over 7 days. It's an absolute nonsense. You can literally win £10,000 at Cheltenham on the play spots in March, go to the Grand National at Aintree, lose £2,000, and you've got to have an affordability check, even though you're £8,000 up. No account is being taken of how much you've won in the previous month or 2 months, only what you've won in the previous 7 days. These arbitrary figures are, I'm afraid, in my opinion, ridiculous. People want proportional checks. We're basically treating everybody in this country who bets on anything as a potential problem gambler, even though the rate of problem gambling in this country is very low, at about 0.3%. So can we have a system where we... I'll give way to my honourable friend.
To have 2 racecourses in the Windsor constituency, but does it not also share my concern that if these checks come into place, all that will happen is for the reasonable person who occasionally bets on horses, all they'll do is they'll go to a black market site. And they'll have no checks whatsoever, and in fact they'll be exposed to all sorts of risks that we don't want to see, and there'll be no revenue to UK horse racing.
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a fair point, and I don't know. It's a matter of dispute as to how many people will go to the black market. It's impossible to know, but it clearly has to be a threat that if people are stopped from betting on legitimate sites and people like a bet, the chances are they're going to keep betting, and if they can't bet on legitimate sites, they're going to go to illegitimate sites. I mean, I don't think that's a huge worry that's not true. I think there's a lot of truth in what my honourable friend says. So I ask the Minister, Mr Hosey, I ask him to make sure that that the government's policy on this has a conservative philosophy behind it, that we believe that people should be free to spend their own money as they wish, and we don't have bookmakers, gambling commission and the government deciding how much each individual can afford to bet on something. Let people make their own judgment, make their own decision. We've got to have some individual responsibility in this. We've got to make any decisions proportionate to the problem, and we're very blessed to have low levels of problem gambling in this country. And the decisions have got to focus on what impact this will have more further wide into the horse racing industry, because it cannot cope with the kind of reductions in betting that my right honourable friend spoke about in his speech. That would be a disaster. And just one final thing, Mr Hosey. There are many people in the racing industry who think, and I'd be interested to know what the Minister thinks, that horse racing is a game of skill. It's a game of skill, chucking out the form, the draw, the ground, all these things. When I back a horse, Mr Hosey, I do it scientifically. I can vouch for the fact they don't always run scientifically, but I pick them scientifically. It is a game of skill. Does he think that games of skill should be treated differently to games of chance when it comes to betting? I would be interested to know what the Minister's thoughts are on that particular principle, because there are people I know who think that it should be treated differently. And I just want to say there are many people who make a living out of betting, professional gamblers. They go through good runs and bad runs. They will lose more than £2,000 over 90 days on many, many occasions. But they've won far more than that in the past. We can't have blanket rules that are not sensible and are not looking at people's overall patterns of behaviour. So I urge him, on the back of the consultation, to think again about affordability checks, think about making them proportionate, think about conservative principles, and at the forefront of his mind, think about the future of the horse racing industry, which I know he doesn't want to damage in any way.